Have you ever felt that something was blocking your spiritual growth, even though you pray regularly and keep holy objects in your home? Perhaps you've sensed an inexplicable heaviness in your heart, a persistent cloud over your life that refuses to lift despite your earnest prayers. The rosary in your drawer, that sacred object you hold so dear, could it possibly be the very thing standing between you and divine protection? Padre Pio, one of the most revered and mystically gifted saints of our time, left us with a critical warning that many have overlooked. A warning that could fundamentally transform your spiritual life and open the floodgates to blessings you've been yearning for. Today, I'm about to share with you a profound teaching from Padre Pio that has remained hidden from many faithful Catholics, a teaching so powerful that it has the potential to bring immediate peace, enhanced spiritual protection, and real transformation to those who heed it. This isn't just another spiritual suggestion. It's an urgent message from a saint who bore the wounds of Christ, who could read souls and who battled demons face to face throughout his life. Padre Pio's spiritual authority is unquestionable, and his wisdom on spiritual warfare is born not from theological theories but from direct mystical experiences with both heavenly and dark forces. The guidance I'm about to share with you comes from someone who could literally see the spiritual battle raging around us, a battle many of us sense but cannot see. But before I reveal this crucial message about certain colored rosaries, I need you to understand something vitally important about the unseen world that surrounds us. The objects we bring into our homes, especially those we use for prayer, carry spiritual significance far beyond their physical appearance. Just as a wedding ring is not merely a band of metal but a powerful symbol of covenant and commitment, the sacred objects we use in prayer are conduits of spiritual energy, either divine protection or, in some troubling cases, something far more concerning. Padre Pio knew this better than most, and his warnings about certain types of rosaries weren't merely personal preferences, but urgent cautions born from supernatural insights that could completely transform your relationship with the divine if you're ready to receive them. Your home is not just a physical space, it's a spiritual sanctuary that either invites divine protection or leaves doors ajar for unwanted influences. Every object within those walls, particularly those used for prayer and devotion, serves as either a beacon for heavenly light or a potential entry point for spiritual darkness. Padre Pio, with his extraordinary spiritual gifts, could instantly sense when a seemingly holy object had been compromised. He would sometimes refuse to touch certain rosaries brought to him for blessing, explaining later that these objects had been tainted, not by their color alone, but by the intentions, rituals, or environments they had been exposed to before reaching the hands of well-meaning faithful. The saint understood that in the spiritual realm, objects absorb and transmit energies in ways our limited human perception cannot readily discern. This understanding isn't superstition, it's deeply rooted in the Catholic tradition of sacramentals, objects blessed by the Church to dispose us to receive grace. Yet just as sacramentals can channel divine assistance, Padre Pio warned that objects misused, incorrectly created, or exposed to negative spiritual influences could become conduits for the opposite effect. Consider your own experience for a moment. Haven't you sometimes felt an inexplicable sense of peace when holding a particular rosary, while another might feel strangely cold or disconnected in your hands? These subtle distinctions aren't merely psychological. They're often your spirit's attempt to alert you to the invisible realities Padre Pio could see plainly. The saint often taught that our intuitive discomforts around certain objects shouldn't be dismissed as imagination but respected as potential spiritual discernment. The battlefield extends beyond just the physical properties of these prayer tools. When you pray with a rosary, you're engaging in spiritual warfare of the highest order, invoking the intercession of the Blessed Mother against forces that seek to disrupt your connection with God. Padre Pio knew that the enemy's most clever strategy isn't to attack faith directly, but to subtly contaminate the very instruments of faith, turning weapons meant for spiritual victory into unwitting liabilities. Think about it. What better way to neutralize a powerful prayer than to taint the very object used to pray it? This is why the saint was so adamant about the proper creation, blessing, and care of rosaries. His warnings weren't meant to cause fear, but to awaken awareness of a reality many modern believers have forgotten: that the physical and spiritual realms constantly intersect, and the objects we use in devotion stand precisely at that critical intersection. Now I must reveal to you the specific warning Padre Pio gave about certain colored rosaries, particularly those with beads of deep black that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it, and those with an unnatural red hue that doesn't resemble natural materials like coral or traditional rose-colored beads. According to accounts from those closest to the saint, Padre Pio expressed specific concern about rosaries featuring these colors when they were produced outside of proper ecclesiastical channels or crafted with materials whose origins were unknown or spiritually questionable. His concern wasn't with the colors themselves in isolation. The Church has no official prohibition against any particular colored rosary, but rather with how these specific colors were sometimes used to disguise rosaries that had been exposed to improper rituals before making their way into the hands of the faithful. The saint could discern, through his extraordinary gifts, when a rosary's appearance masked a troubling spiritual reality. These problematic rosaries often found their way to believers through seemingly innocent channels, gifted by well-meaning friends, purchased from street vendors near pilgrimage sites, or even ordered online without knowledge of their origins. Padre Pio would explain that some of these rosaries had been deliberately created without proper blessing, or worse, had been present during inappropriate rituals before being sold as ordinary devotional items. The most concerning cases involved rosaries created with explicitly negative intentions, or those that had been used in practices contrary to the faith before being reintroduced into circulation. While most believers would never knowingly accept such an object, the saint cautioned that without spiritual discernment, even the most devout could inadvertently welcome these compromised sacramentals into their prayer lives, unknowingly inviting spiritual interference rather than divine assistance. The consequences of praying with such compromised rosaries weren't always dramatic or immediately apparent, and this is precisely what made them so insidious in Padre Pio's view. Often, the effects manifested as subtle spiritual hindrances: prayers that felt hollow, a gradual cooling of fervor, unexplained spiritual dryness, or a strange resistance to previously cherished devotions. Rather than grand spiritual calamities, the saint observed that these tainted objects typically produced a gradual weakening of spiritual resolve and receptivity to grace, like a slowly advancing spiritual anemia, rather than a sudden collapse. Do you recognize any of these symptoms in your own spiritual life? Have your prayers begun to feel mechanical, your devotion more duty than desire? If so, I urge you to examine your devotional objects, especially your rosary, with new eyes. If this message resonates with your spirit, please write in the comments, "I am ready to purify my prayer life," and subscribe to our channel for more spiritual protection guidance from the saints. Your spiritual intuition is the first line of defense against problematic devotional objects. Padre Pio consistently taught that God gives each soul a natural capacity for spiritual discernment, though many believers have allowed this gift to atrophy through disuse or dismissal. When you hold your rosary, particularly if it features the concerning colors mentioned earlier, close your eyes and pay attention to the subtle sensations that arise. Does the rosary feel unexplainably heavy in your hands? Does an unusual coldness emanate from it, not just physically, but in a way that seems to reach your spirit? Do you feel a subtle resistance to praying with it despite its perhaps beautiful appearance? These reactions aren't merely psychological. They're often the Holy Spirit's gentle warnings, the same warnings Padre Pio could see manifested visibly in the spiritual realm. The saint would often tell believers that their discomfort with certain objects wasn't imagination but inspiration, an important distinction for those seeking authentic spiritual growth. Beyond intuitive discernment, there are practical aspects to consider when evaluating your rosary's spiritual integrity. Padre Pio emphasized the importance of knowing the provenance of devotional objects, where they were made, by whom, and whether they've been properly blessed by a priest. Rosaries from unknown sources, particularly those featuring the problematic deep black or unnatural red colorations, warranted special scrutiny in the saint's estimation. He particularly cautioned against rosaries acquired from non-religious sources, those purchased in locations known for occult practices, or those given by individuals whose spiritual orientation was unclear or concerning. The saint wasn't promoting paranoia but prudence, a virtue often overlooked in our eagerness to accumulate devotional items without considering their spiritual history. Consider your own rosary now. Do you know its origins? Was it properly blessed? Has it ever been in environments or hands that might have exposed it to spiritual influences contrary to its sacred purpose? The good news, and Padre Pio always emphasized hope over fear, is that even potentially compromised rosaries can often be spiritually rehabilitated. The formal blessing of a priest, which invokes the Church's authority to sanctify objects for sacred use, serves as a powerful spiritual reset for most devotional items. However, in cases where Padre Pio sensed deeper spiritual corruption, he sometimes recommended more comprehensive measures: thorough cleaning with holy water, period of quarantine in a blessed space such as near a tabernacle, or in some cases, respectful disposal followed by replacement with a properly sourced and blessed alternative. The saint's approach was never to induce anxiety but to foster responsible stewardship of the sacred, a principle that extends to all aspects of spiritual life. Just as you wouldn't wear soiled garments to an important meeting, Padre Pio taught that our spiritual tools deserve the dignity of proper care and cleansing. According to those who studied closely with Padre Pio, his teachings on protecting oneself from spiritually compromised objects rested on three fundamental pillars, which I'll now share with you in detail. The first pillar is discernment of origin. This means developing a disciplined habit of investigating the source of every devotional object that enters your spiritual life. Padre Pio taught that a rosary's journey before reaching your hands matters significantly, not just who made it, but where it has been and what spiritual environments it has occupied. This pillar is important because objects absorb spiritual qualities from their surroundings, just as a sponge absorbs the liquid in which it sits. The practical application involves purchasing rosaries only from reputable religious sources, accepting them only from individuals whose spiritual life you trust, and always learning the history of second-hand devotional items before incorporating them into your prayer practice. When in doubt, Padre Pio recommended waiting and praying for clarity rather than hastily bringing an object of uncertain provenance into your intimate spiritual space. The second pillar is proper consecration. Padre Pio emphasized that even rosaries from trustworthy sources should be formally blessed by a priest before use, as this blessing transforms an ordinary object into a true sacramental of the Church. This consecration is important because it explicitly places the object under divine protection and dedicates it exclusively to sacred purpose, creating a spiritual shield against potential negative influences. To apply this principle, bring new rosaries to your parish priest for blessing before using them in prayer. And if you're uncertain whether your current rosary has been blessed, have it blessed again. Repeated blessings only deepen an object's sacred character. Padre Pio particularly stressed this step for rosaries featuring the concerning colors mentioned earlier, as proper consecration could neutralize many, though not all, problematic spiritual attachments. He taught that the Church's blessing wasn't merely a nice tradition, but a genuine spiritual transaction with real protective power. The third pillar, perhaps the most overlooked in modern practice, is reverential use and storage. Padre Pio instructed believers to treat their rosaries with the same reverence accorded to other sacred objects, never allowing them to be handled disrespectfully or stored carelessly among mundane items. This principle matters because our treatment of sacred objects reflects and affects our interior disposition toward the divine realities they represent. In practical terms, this means having a dedicated place for your rosary, perhaps a small blessed box or pouch, keeping it from being tossed among keys and coins, and handling it with intentional reverence rather than casual familiarity. The saint particularly cautioned against leaving rosaries in bathrooms, near occult books or objects, even those kept for purely academic purposes, or in places associated with conflict or negative emotions. When traveling, he advised keeping one's rosary on one's person, rather than leaving it in hotel rooms or other transient spaces where it might be exposed to unknown influences. If you've discovered that your rosary falls into one of the concerning categories Padre Pio warned about, particularly those of deep black or unnatural red coloration from unknown sources, don't panic. The saint always emphasized that God's power far exceeds any negative influence and provided clear guidance for the purification of potentially compromised devotional objects. The purification process begins with honest prayer, acknowledging any unknowing mistakes in acquiring or handling the rosary, and expressing your sincere desire to correct the situation. Padre Pio taught that this humility creates the spiritual conditions necessary for effective purification. He recommended a simple but powerful prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, I present this rosary to your Sacred Heart and to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Cleanse it of any influence contrary to your divine will, and make it a pure instrument of grace in my life. This acknowledgement isn't about inducing guilt, but opening the door to spiritual restoration. Following this prayer of intention, Padre Pio prescribed a specific physical cleansing using sacramentals of the Church. First, the rosary should be thoroughly sprinkled with holy water, not just a drop, but a generous application while praying the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. The saint explained that holy water isn't just symbolically significant, but spiritually potent, capable of disrupting negative spiritual attachments. After this initial cleansing, he recommended wrapping the rosary in a blessed cloth or placing it on consecrated ground, such as near a tabernacle with pastoral permission, for a period of 3 days, a duration reflecting the 3 days Christ spent in the tomb before resurrection. During this time, the saint advised praying specifically for the rosary's purification, perhaps offering a novena to Saint Michael or to Padre Pio himself, who continues his ministry of spiritual protection from heaven. This period of quarantine allows the blessing to thoroughly penetrate the object, replacing any negative influence with sacred purpose. After this period of purification, Padre Pio taught that the rosary should be formally reblessed by a priest, preferably one known for his devotion to the Blessed Mother. This rebirth and blessing completes the purification process, restoring the rosary to its proper function as a channel of grace, rather than a potential source of spiritual interference. However, the saint was also practical in his guidance. In cases where he sensed that a rosary had been deliberately corrupted through occult practices, or had been present during seriously sinful activities, he sometimes recommended respectful disposal followed by replacement. Such disposal isn't casual discarding, but should follow the proper protocols for blessed items: burial in consecrated ground, or ceremonial burning followed by returning the ashes to the earth. Remember that Padre Pio's concern was never with the monetary value of devotional objects, but with their spiritual integrity and the well-being of the faithful who use them in their intimate conversations with heaven. Your intention when using the rosary creates a spiritual current that either amplifies or diminishes its effectiveness as a prayer tool. Padre Pio frequently taught that even the most beautifully crafted and properly blessed rosary would yield limited spiritual fruit if used with distraction, haste, or mere habit rather than heartfelt devotion. The saint could discern immediately when someone was saying rather than praying the rosary, a distinction that transcends words and resides in the heart's orientation. He explained that praying the rosary is not primarily about completing a certain number of repeated prayers, but about entering, through those prayers, into the sacred mysteries of Christ's life alongside Mary. This understanding transforms the rosary from a potential spiritual task into a genuine spiritual journey. When you hold your rosary, especially after ensuring it's free from the concerning elements previously discussed, Padre Pio would ask, are you approaching this prayer as a conversation with heaven or as a religious obligation to be completed? The power of intention extends beyond just the rosary to all aspects of spiritual practice. Padre Pio witnessed countless cases where believers surrounded themselves with properly blessed religious objects, yet experienced minimal spiritual growth because their intentions remained scattered, worldly, or self-centered. He explained that devotional objects, including the rosary, function somewhat like spiritual antennas. They can be perfectly constructed and positioned, But if not connected to a power source, sincere devotion, they remain merely decorative. This explains why some individuals with simple, humble rosaries but fervent hearts received extraordinary graces, while others with expensive, artistically superior rosaries but lukewarm intentions noticed little spiritual effect. The saint wasn't dismissing the importance of proper devotional objects. He remained firm on the warnings about certain colors and sources, but was establishing a spiritual hierarchy where intention ranks even above the object itself. Consider now, when you pray with your rosary, where does your mind journey? Do you mentally tick off prayers? Or do you allow yourself to be transported into the presence of Christ and His Mother? Importantly, Padre Pio taught that our intention can actually help remediate minor spiritual problems with devotional objects. While this doesn't override the need for proper blessing and the avoidance of seriously compromised items, like the specifically colored rosaries from questionable sources, it does suggest that sincere devotion creates a spiritual current strong enough to overcome subtle negative influences. The saint sometimes compared this to a powerful river that naturally purifies itself through its own force and movement. A genuinely devoted heart generates spiritual momentum that can sweep away lesser obstacles. This teaching offers hope, especially for those who might have unwittingly prayed with problematic rosaries in the past. Rather than dwelling on concerns about previous prayers, Padre Pio would recommend redoubling one's devotional sincerity going forward, ensuring both the proper external conditions, a suitable rosary, and the essential internal disposition, heartfelt intention. The combination of these elements, purified tool and purified intention, creates the optimal conditions for the rosary to fulfill its designed purpose as one of the most powerful weapons in the spiritual arsenal. Through his decades of ministry, Padre Pio witnessed countless transformations in the lives of people who heeded his warnings about compromised rosaries and embraced his guidance for spiritual purification. One particularly striking case involved a woman from Naples who had struggled for years with inexplicable spiritual dryness, despite her faithful religious practice. Upon meeting Padre Pio, she was startled when he immediately asked about the unusual deep black rosary she kept in her home, but rarely used because it felt heavy in her hands. A rosary she hadn't brought with her and hadn't mentioned to anyone at the monastery. The saint explained that this rosary, gifted to her by an acquaintance with unknown spiritual affiliations, had been present during rituals contrary to the faith before coming into her possession. Though she used other rosaries for prayer, simply having this compromised object in her home was creating what Padre Pio described as a spiritual interference, affecting her entire devotional life. After following the saint's purification protocol, which included removing the problematic rosary from her home, she experienced a profound spiritual renewal, describing it as the lifting of a veil I hadn't even realized was there. Another revealing case from Padre Pio's ministry involved a devout priest who had inexplicably begun experiencing disturbing dreams and a mysterious aversion to certain traditional prayers, symptoms that emerged shortly after acquiring an antique rosary, with unusual red beads from a market vendor near a European pilgrimage site. Concerned by these unexpected spiritual disruptions, he sought counsel from Padre Pio, who immediately identified the recently acquired rosary as the source of the disturbance. The saint explained that this particular rosary, despite its beautiful craftsmanship and apparent antiquity, had been deliberately corrupted through exposure to occult practices before being sold to unsuspecting pilgrims. After properly disposing of the compromised rosary and undergoing a period of spiritual cleansing under Padre Pio's guidance, the priest reported not only the cessation of the troubling symptoms, but a heightened sensitivity to spiritual influences that served him well throughout his subsequent ministry. This case particularly highlighted the saint's teaching that spiritual sensitivity isn't superstition, but a necessary discernment skill for effective ministry in a world where the sacred and profane often intermingle. Less dramatic, but equally significant were the many cases where individuals reported subtle but meaningful improvements in their prayer lives after replacing questionable rosaries with properly sourced and blessed alternatives. One family from central Italy had maintained a tradition of praying the rosary together daily, yet described their devotion as increasingly mechanical over the years, a perfunctory religious exercise rather than a living conversation with heaven. Upon learning of Padre Pio's warnings about certain types of rosaries, they discovered that the set they used had been purchased from a non-religious source and featured the deep black beads of concern to the saint. After replacing these with properly blessed rosaries from a reputable religious supplier, family members independently reported a renewed sense of presence and engagement in their prayer. What one described as the difference between speaking into an empty room and suddenly realizing someone is actually listening. The saint explained that while their prayers had always been heard by heaven, the compromised rosaries had been subtly dampening their ability to sense the divine response, like praying through a spiritual fog that had now lifted. Today stands as a pivotal moment in your spiritual journey, a threshold between continuing with unconscious spiritual practices and embracing the higher awareness Padre Pio sought to impart to all who would listen. The wisdom I've shared with you isn't meant to induce fear, but to awaken discernment, that precious spiritual sense that helps us navigate the invisible realities surrounding us daily. Take a moment now to reflect on your rosary and other devotional objects. Do any feature the concerning deep black or unnatural red colorations the saint warned about? Do you know their origins, their journey before reaching your hands? Have they been properly blessed by a priest? Most importantly, how do they feel in your hands during prayer? Do they seem to facilitate or subtly hinder your connection with the divine? These questions aren't incidental but essential for anyone seeking authentic spiritual growth in a world where the sacred and profane often wear similar disguises. The practical steps forward are clear and beautifully simple. First, examine your devotional objects with new eyes, paying special attention to rosaries featuring the colors Padre Pio specifically cautioned against when from uncertain sources. Second, for any that raise concerns, either follow the purification protocol outlined earlier, or in cases where you sense stronger spiritual resistance, consider respectful disposal followed by replacement with properly sourced alternatives. Third, ensure that all devotional objects in your home receive proper blessing, not just as a formality, but as a genuine spiritual safeguard. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, renew your intention when using these sacred tools, remembering that even the most perfectly suited rosary serves little purpose without the heart's sincere engagement. Each of these steps represents not just a practical action, but a spiritual declaration, an assertion that you take seriously both the visible and invisible dimensions of your faith journey. Padre Pio's legacy of spiritual protection continues to guide souls toward deeper communion with God, free from the subtle interferences that so often go unnoticed in our busy, externally focused world. The saint's sensitivity to spiritual realities wasn't an extraordinary gift meant only for him, but a model of the awakened spiritual senses available to all believers who sincerely seek them. The rosary, when properly sourced, blessed, and used, remains one of the most powerful spiritual weapons available to believers, capable of working profound transformations both within and around us. Don't let another day pass without ensuring that this precious spiritual tool is serving its intended purpose in your life, free from the compromising elements Padre Pio so clearly warned against. The peace, protection, and spiritual clarity that await you on the other side of this renewed awareness aren't vague religious promises, but tangible realities experienced by countless souls who have heeded the saint's guidance. Your spiritual renaissance begins today, with a simple but profound decision to approach your devotional life with new intentionality and discernment.